My name's Heather O'Hagan and I've been associated with the Kerepehi Brass Band since 1994 when my sons joined, and I came onto the committee in 1995 and started playing in 1997.
What were you playing?
I was given a baritone by Rolly Bradley, who was one of the bass players, and he said, "Here, play that." I'd learnt the piano, so they didn't have to teach me how to read music, which made it much easier, and I'd sat in on all the boys' lessons and their early band practices, so I had some sort of an inkling of how you actually played a brass instrument. But it was a very interesting first year. And the band went off to the regional contest in Whakatane in 1997, and that was the first time that I actually played with the band, having only been playing for probably about 6 months. I've only ever played the baritone, and my sons played cornet, tenor horn. They switched around a bit. And then my daughter Anne also started with the band. She started on the tenor horn, but she was always keen to play the trombone. One of the other band members had a slide trumpet, which she gave her to play around with when she was little. And she moved on to the trombone when she was probably in her early teens. But she had an awful lot of trouble getting her arm out far enough for the last position. And thinking about the various playouts that we went to, I remember that first competition because that was the first time I'd played with the band. The band hosted the area competitions in Ngātia for his 50th anniversary. I wasn't playing then. I think my boys were. I can't remember. I'd have to go back and have a look in the archives. So that was the year the band won the D grade hymn. And we didn't go to a lot of the area competitions, but we always went to the Country Women's Institute competitions in Thames. And the members would play solos and duets, and there'd be small ensembles plus the full band one. I played a couple of duets with Jack Brooks. I was never confident enough to play any solos. And those were a really good training ground for actually playing in public on your own. And the competitions folded in 2007, and it was a big hole for the band as a training ground for the younger ones. Nothing ever came around to replace that in quite the same form. Chris Geelan was the musical director. He used to get a little bit frustrated at times. We'd practice up something furiously and you'd come along the next week and everybody had forgotten all their instructions as to what they were supposed to be doing and when. I remember him arranging Flick the Little Fire Engine as a march for the Pyro Fire Brigade Centennial, and that was in 1995. The band marched down the main street of Pyro playing, amongst other things, Flick the Little Fire Engine. And there was a little fire engine in the parade with a number plate Flick, so it was very appropriate. So Chris's style of music was quite different to what Brett Lowe got the band playing when he took over as musical director. It was a very challenging thing trying to play dance music like tangos, but I really enjoyed the tangos, even to the extent of giving them a rose to conduct with, because I thought that was more appropriate than a baton. The play out that I probably remember the most is when we had the little harp group join us and sitting watching these 3 harpists play and having a look at the harps afterwards and figuring out how they actually worked. That was really, really interesting.
Was that Glenys?
Yes. unfortunately they've sort of fragmented, they've all moved away. You want to stop that for a... One of the reasons why the family got associated with the brass band was my children all went through Pyro kindergarten, where Seat Dion was a kindy teacher, and she would occasionally take her flugelhorn along to kindy to entertain the kids. And the brass band's old hats, when they changed the uniform back in the mid-80s, some of the old hats ended up in the dress-up box at the kindergarten, and they had to be hidden because the kids would fight over whose turn it was to wear the hat. And when one of my sons was quite small, he was asthmatic, and it was an effort in teaching him breath control, taking up the brass instrument, and just sort of grew from there. It's interesting that a little blip on the landscape like Kerepehi still manages to have a brass band going when so many have fallen by the wayside over recent years. I looked at the band at the 70th birthday celebrations, and I thought, I wonder if we're going to make 75, particularly when so soon after that we had the deaths of Chris Geelan and Jack Brooks. Very soon after that, 75th, and also Vay Vivian died about a fortnight afterwards. And I really didn't think we'd make 75, and it's really good to see the band revitalising itself over the last few years. The different conductors have different ideas as to the direction the band would go in, and some players appreciate it and some players don't. It all comes out in the wash. And I hope we're still going in another 5 years. The last couple of years have been a very interesting challenge with all the COVID restrictions and things like that. It's going to be interesting to see what happens over the next year or so, once we're more back to normal. I like the challenge of some of the music, but I have, unfortunately, my personal practice is not quite as frequent and as good as it should be. Having stood down as secretary, I hope that I'm going to have more time to actually put into the practice. The dogs don't appreciate it, so I try and time it for when they're out for a walk. So some of the music can be a bit challenging, but if you don't challenge yourself and you stick to the easy stuff, then the level of capability just keeps on dropping. So it's really interesting to have some new music put in front of us, as well as some of the good old favourites. I was not brought up in a particularly religious household, but I went to a boarding school where church services were very common, so a lot of the hymn tunes I know, but it's nice to get out of the hymn book and into other stuff. And sometimes we do get a bit bogged down in the hymns. Certain times of year, that seems to be all you're playing, like Pulled Up Anzac Day and so on. And getting out in the public, playing the Christmas carols, it might get a little bit boring playing jingle bells all the time, but the public really like to hear the brass band. And we had a few years where we weren't out caroling all around the health and safety aspect of being on a truck and that sort of thing, but it's been really good the last few years to get back to the caroling. The busking in Hamilton has been really interesting. I've really enjoyed the times I've been over there. It's amazing who you spot amongst the watchers and the listeners that you actually know. When my sons were learning, I'd take them out to the band hall and they'd have an hour-long lesson with Rowan, and I'd do things like take the lawnmower out and mow the lawn, which was never an easy thing. The back of the section is a bit uneven in places. And just the odd clean up, hanging new curtains, and using the offcuts from all the old ones to sew the curtain for the library window to save money. I'd not been involved in much in the way of the hands-on stuff, but we had a big push back in the 1999-2000, that era, to refurbish the band hall. It had all got a bit dilapidated. And there was a lot of work on fundraising and hat round to the council and so on, organising that. And it was really good to reopen the band hall and unveil the plaque acknowledging that it had had so much work done to it. The input from people like Rowan and Jack into the carpentry side, inside building shelves and things like that, and Jody Ong with his ongoing maintenance on the hall, and John Bryce used to clamber around on the roof quite happily. His job at one point had been installing sky aerials, so he was used to being on the roof. It was very handy. We've missed his input over the last 9 months into the maintenance side of things. Over the years, we've tried different ways of keeping the section under control. George Weir used to drive from Athenry, towing a trailer with a ride-on lawnmower, and mow the band hall lawn every couple of weeks, and it was always a real struggle to get him to accept petrol vouchers as payment. Chase Downham Smith at one point put her horses on the back lawn to try and keep things under control. We've had the odd goat. There's currently sheep there at the moment. It is a bit difficult in the summer if the grass gets a bit high. It is a bit of a fire risk for the neighbours. And it's really good that now it's looking a lot better, courtesy of the furry, woolly lawnmowers. And the neighbour across the road who's been mowing the front part since he retired, he's been looking for things to do, so that's really good. The band travelled to the area contest in Gisborne, I think it was in 2000. Gisborne had come up this way when we'd hosted the competition, so we thought we'd return the favour. So we all stayed together in a motel. It was a good weekend away. Did the same when we went to Whakatane. A really good family atmosphere. One of the very early family days that I can remember is the picnic at the Waiumu Domain. And some of the other bands around were invited to come along. A couple of barbecues. And I remember Jack Brooks loading his trailer up with all the chairs so that everybody had something to sit on. And a good swim afterwards. And the public driving up the road, stopping and having a listen, and it was really good. Trying to organise other things like that always proved a little bit difficult, trying to find a date when everybody was available to come. It's something that the first practice back after the Christmas break was often more of a social event than a practice. We visited Raywin Leonhardt a couple of years ago when she'd moved into her house in Waihi Beach, so the first practice was in her garage over there. I think we had one at Seaton Joe's at one point, but just that social thing, we don't do it enough. Everybody's got too busy.